Hello, greens, peace, and power and elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. It's your girl Tiffany come through here live in effect. So I want to say salam alaikum to all the beautiful Muslim brothers and sisters out there. Juma Mubarak, Ramadan Mubarak for those of you that celebrate Ramadan, and universal greetings to everybody else. So today's topic I'll be dealing with Lucius Lehman. Lucius Lehman, right? I spoke about him not too long ago on my couple of my previous videos with the one I did about the prison conversion and all of that. Yeah. So this video, I just want to focus on him because it was said to be that this is where the idea that the Nation Islam got their concept of black nationalism from this guy right here. So Lucius Lehman was locked up in St. Quentin prison. Okay, he was a self-proclaimed imam. According to the information, it said that he came from Sudan, and he claimed himself to be a Muslim and a black nationalist. He declared himself as that. And it was also said that W.D. Fard, the founder of the Nation Islam, which at that time was the lost fruit of Islam, he got his ideas from this guy. So him and this guy was locked up in the same facility together. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to read up some documentation, some information that I was able to gather, and then there's a book that you guys can check out about the history of African American and Islam in America. I mean, there's so many books on the subject, but yeah, this particular book is from Patrick D. Bowen. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, like the channel, share the channel, all that great stuff. All right. And thank you for those of you that's been subscribing over here. So let's go ahead and get to the subject matter. So as you can see, this is a picture of Lucius Lehman. All right. This is Lucius Lehman as a prisoner. So I'm going to go to the article. And this article comes from the Harvard University education website, right? The graduate journal of Harvard Divinity School. It's called The Color Genius. And I went over this article before, but I'm doing it again since I'm focusing on the subject on Lucius Lehman. All right, so it says The Color Genius, Lucius Lehman and the Californian Roots of Modern African American Islam, by Patrick D. Bowen, PhD candidate, University of Denver Lift School of Theology. All right, so as you can see where it says that this article present for the first time the figure of Lucius Lehman, a self-proclaimed black Muslim mullah who, after living a fascinating life in Southern California, was incarcerated in St. Quentin prison from 1910 to 1924, and as a result may have indirectly influenced the creation of the Nation of Islam doctrines. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's look at it. So under the introduction, as you can see, this is the picture of him once again. It says one of the most controversial issues in the study of African American Islam is the question of whether Wallace D. Fard, the founder of the Nation Islam, was the same person as the Wallace or Wally Dodd Ford incarcerated in St. Quentin prison in the second half of the 1920s. According to the Nation Islam tradition, Wallace Fard was born in Mecca, Arabia, to a black father and white mother on February 1677 after studying in London and at the University of Southern California. Fard, who was on a divine mission, arrived in Detroit on July 4th, 1930 to introduce to these African Americans his teaching about their origins. That black people are the original man, that their people were from Mecca, and that Islam was their true religion. However, in the 1950s, the FBI is an attempt to discredit the NOI, conducted an investigation of Fard's background and soon leaked its conclusion to the press. Fard's true identity, the FBI asserted, was far from the idealized image he had given the NOI. He, first of all, was neither from Mecca nor half black. Fard was actually a dark-complexioned white or mixed white and Asian man originally from Oregon, Hawaii, or New Zealand, who had been living in Los Angeles since the 1910s and was directly husband and father, and was a small-time opium dealer. It was, in fact, due to the last of these traits that resulted in Fard, whose true name the FBI claimed was Wallace or Wally Dodd Ford. All right. Being incarcerated in St. Quentin prison in California from 1926 to 1929. The strongest piece of evidence present to support this claim were photographs and fingerprints of Wallace Dodd Ford, purportedly from St. Quentin prison, that matched those of the Fard who was arrested in Detroit in 1930s. One of the main criticisms of this evidence that has been brought up by the NOI is that no one outside the government has seen proof that these two pieces of evidence, particularly the fingerprints records, were genuine and not painted or planted by the FBI as part of its well-known disinformation and counterintelligence activities at the time. So now to sum it up, before I go any further, so it's said to be that Wallace D. Muhammad, or Wallace Fard Muhammad, right, whose name was Wallace Dodd Ford, was a inmate at St. Quentin prison. Okay. All right. And according to the Nation of Islam, they said that he was half black and half white. All right. So they say he was mixed and he came from Mecca. But the FBI documents information say no, he ain't even come from that. He not even half black. He's mixed with Asian and white. And he probably came from Hawaii or he came from New Zealand. All right. So this man went through a different identity, right? He concealed his original identity. And again, according to records, that he was locked up in St. Quentin prison. And he was also arrested in Detroit as well. Okay. Now, this is just the information. Now, some members from the Nation of Islam going to get offended. They're going to get upset and say, oh, that's not true. Blah, 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 blah. You know how that go. They'll get in their feelings. But that's what's been documented. And I'm only going by what's documented. So don't argue with me about it. Okay? Let's continue. All right. So, pardon me. All right. So it says recently, however, a 1917 draft registration card from Los Angeles for a Wallace Dodd Fard on the car Ford is put in parentheses next to Fard, indicating that the farmer was an alternative spelling has been uncovered. The card indicates that this Fard was born in 1893 on February 26th, the same day, though not the same year that the Nation Islam claimed for its founder. Farr, described as being of medium height and built with brown eyes and black hair, is listed as an unmarried restaurant owner. Finally, his place of birth is noted as being Shinika, Afghanistan, which is possibly what is known today as the Shinike region in the southeast part of Afghanistan, or a town with a similar name in nearby northwest Pakistan. Both places inhabited by the Muslim Pashtun people. The majority of these traits are consistent with much of the evidence concerning Farr discovered by the FBI in its investigation, and as well as the additional evidence and analysis presented by Carl Evans in his biography of Elijah Muhammad and Fatima Abdul Tawwab Fanusi in her 2008 dissertation. In particular, the connection between this Farr, Afghanistan, and Pashtun people is incredibly subjective, as Evans and Fanusi, prior to this card coming to light, had traced a number of rather rare terms and ideas in the NOI to likely having a Pashtun or at least a Pakistani provenance. Farr may have actually been born in that region, or he may have given authorities his father's place of birth instead of his own. Evans suggests as a possibility Farr's father could have taught his son tradition from his homeland, and Wallace might have borrowed from these when creating the NOI's doctrine. In addition to the draft card, a 1924 marriage record from Southern California to a Wally Dodd Ford has been found. Ford's parents' names are listed here and are the same as what Farr told the NOI and FBI. What I do not wish to say the draft card and marriage record are indisputable proof that Ford in Los Angeles was the same person identified by the FBI, as well as the same person who later appeared in Detroit. It certainly increases the likelihood. Okay, so now the author goes on to say, with it therefore being very probable that the founder of the NOI was incarcerated in St. Quentin prison from 1926 to 1929, during which time likely developed the main ideas that would become the NOI doctrines. Knowledge of the ideological trends among St. Quentin's black prisoners in the 1920s would help us gain a deeper understanding of how it was that the NOI acquires its famous, if not notorious, racialized worldview. Although a few attempts have been made along these lines, these have been, for the most part, based almost entirely on speculation, and they have all ignored two key pieces of evidence. One, the fact that a highly intelligent black man who presented himself as an Islamic leader and a committed black nationalist was living in St. Quentin until 1924. Two, St. Quentin's small black prison population was reportedly committed to black nationalism in as late as 1925 and most likely was at least somewhat interested in Islam. And it says this article is primarily a discussion of the first of these two issues. I will present a brief biography of the man known as Lucius Lehman, a self-proclaimed mullah imam of Islam, Egyptian Sudan, who has until now been completely ignored in the history of African American Islam. The majority of this article will offer an overview of what can currently be documented about his fascinating life. This will be followed by a discussion of the development of Islamic black nationalism and how this was connected with Lucius' likely influence on St. Quentin's black prisoners in the 1920s, an influence that's probably lingered after he was released in 1924. Although most readers of this article will be interested in Lehman because of his likely indirect influence on the NOI's founder, the story of Lehman and his Islamic black nationalism is also important for scholarship on African American Islam for another reason. It demonstrates that the connection being made between Islam and black nationalism in the 1920s and 30s, which were exemplified by the Nation Islam, but also could be found in Ahmadiyya movement and the Moorish temple, were to some extent natural. That is, individuals like Lehman, who may have had no exposure to popular African American Islamic group at the time, could have independently come to the conclusion that an Islamic identity and black nationalism should be combined. The story of Lehman therefore helps deepen our understanding of the attractiveness for Islam for African Americans in general in the first half of the 20th century and later. All right. So, indirectly speaking, this man has brought about the influence of Islam and Black nationalism together. Now, technically, in this Islamic religion, in Sunni Islam particularly, there's no such thing as white nationalism, Black nationalism, or any type of ethnic group nationalism. You're a Muslim first, and that's what you got to recognize yourself as. Everything else should be put to the side. That's how it is in the traditional Islamic culture. However, with there being ethnic groups such as Blacks, they want to be able to give worship and praise to Allah, but they also want to have something they can identify with culturally speaking. So they ain't just want to just identify with just Islam alone, but they also want to identify with their Blackness or with their African heritage as well. And that was the whole thing with Lucius Lehman. He wanted to bring that connection between Islam and Black nationalism, combine it. But continue to listen as I go further into this article. So it says the trial and tribulations of Lucius Lehman. So according to Lucius' death certificate, his real name was Luther Lamar. He was born on March the 10th, 1863 in South Africa, and he was a U.S. veteran who had been living in the local national military home for at least a few days prior to his death. Unfortunately, none of this can be confirmed by other records, and it is all in fact highly suspect. First of all, Lucius' divorced wife's name is listed in the death certificate as the same name as his supposed real name, Lamar, but she had never used that name since the time of their marriage and after. Lucius' wife, Maddie, had used the name Lenin, also spelled as Lenan, a name Lucius himself had once used, as we will see. In addition, there is no known birth certificate for Lucius, who consistently claimed a non-U.S. origin. Also, Lucius' birthplace is listed as Khartoum, South Africa. Such a city does not exist as far as I know in any part of Southern Africa. It is likely that the city name is incorrect spelling of Khartoum, the East African city in Sudan, which Lucius frequently claimed was his home. The fact that the certificate lists two seemingly complete different locations within Africa may reflect a mistake on the part of the person recording the information, though over the years, Lucius himself would make similar contradictory claims about his African home. In addition to assertion about being from other places within and without Africa, indeed throughout his life, Lucius gave so many claims about his background that we may never know the truth about his origins. And then goes on to say, as for evidence of Lucius' supposed U.S. military career, there is, in short, almost nothing to confirm it. There are currently no available records of his stay in the National Military Home, and his more specific claim about his military service that he was a Buffalo soldier serving in Troop A, 10th Cavalry, WSG, 1882 to 1887, educated at Fort Davis, Texas, and was honorably discharged, currently cannot be backed up by military records. Even if the military records are incomplete, Lucius was indeed a Buffalo soldier. He definitely was not one in 1887. The earliest record we currently have for Lucius places him in Los Angeles on December 5th, 1886, the day of his marriage to Ann Daniels. So just like Farah Muhammad, this guy went through different names, different identities. Okay. So his name was Luther Lamar, but then he went through the name Lucius Lehman. And here it says Lucius C. Lennon. So he done went through different name changes. All right. Let's continue. So at the time of his 1886 marriage, Lucius spelled his name Lucius C. Lennon. and claimed to be from the Caribbean country of Haiti. But a year later, in his declaration of intention for naturalization, he now spelled his name Lucius Cotella Lenon, indicating that he was from Tahiti in the southern Pacific between Australia and South America. So it says just 3 months after his naturalization, Lucius' marriage came apart, and what would be his first of many appearances in California's newspaper. A news brief indicated that Lucius, whose name was written as Lucius Lehman, had been arrested for intentionally throw a hatchet at his wife, an action that reportedly was resulting of him flying into a range when Anne supposedly discovered that Lucius had raped her 10-year-old daughter. Oh, on April 6, 1886, Lucius was found guilty of rape and sentenced to serve 14 years in Folsom Prison. Over the course of the next year, Lucius' lawyer appealed on the grounds of minor legal errors in the trial, but when he failed, Lucius became his own advocate and in 1890s wrote letters to various officials professing his innocence and asking for a pardon. Lucius claimed that when he had married Anne, she did not tell him that she had children. After the marriage was official, she brought her children into their home, burdening Lucius and making him miserable. To alleviate his pain, Lucius decided to leave and give Anne half of his money, but she did not accept this, and the couple began fighting often, culminating in Anne having her daughter accuse Lucius of rape. So, in this case, the marriage was going bad for him. So he gave this woman half of his money and got the hell on because he didn't want to be bothered with her. And then it resulted into a big argument to where now this woman used her daughter as a weapon against him by saying that he raped her. So that was his argument. That was his claim. So it was a rape. It was a false rape accusation that took place to where it landed him 14 years in prison. But yeah, so he got away with that argument. Of course, he was able to get off. All right. So nobody really knows the real story behind it. But let's continue. While we may never know whether Lucius did indeed rape his stepdaughter, Lucius' letters on the subject are, to say the least, impressive, at least from a historical standpoint. He refined handwriting, his command of logic, and his awareness of legal arguments and jargon are indicative of a man possessing a sharp mind and a quality educational background, a rare privilege in American society at the time for a member of any race. It is all the most impressive considering the fact that A, he was black at a time when the majority of black Americans were completely illiterate, and that B, in the late 19th century, there was only a very small number of African American lawyers in the entire U.S., let alone in California, where blacks had begun being admitted to the state bar only in 1887, and only a handful had actually become lawyers by the 1890s. These letters are therefore the first of many testaments to Lucius' intelligence and claimed elite background. Oh, there's a lot that he wrote on here. Shoot. All right, so all right, so let's go down to it. Says at the time, however, Lucius' letter failed to make the impact he was seeking. He was not pardoned, though because of good behavior, he ended up only serving around 10 years of his sentence, being released in February 1897 upon obtaining his freedom. Lucius now spelled his name Lucius C. Lehman and claimed to be from Jamaica, found a job as a cook, and in December married one Maddie Clark from Tennessee. Following the marriage for 6 months, Lucius' life appears to have achieved a degree of stability and freedom that he had not had since perhaps his childhood. But in late June of 1898, Lucius was back in the courts as well as in the press, and was becoming something of a local sensation. Okay. On June 29th, Lucius was arrested for burglary. Earlier in the month, he had, through a middleman, responded to an announcement that a reward would be given for the return of business paper of a man named James Robinson, papers that had been stolen from his home. Lucius claimed to have found papers scattered about in a park and brought them to an attorney who was supposed to return the papers for a small transaction fee. The papers that Lucius returned, however, did not include the most important and valuable ones that had been stolen. So Robinson refused to pay the reward and notified the police. The police questioned Lucius, who told them he might be able to find the missing papers. He charged a search fee, then left the interrogation, soon returned with more papers as well as a coat and watch that had also been stolen from Robinson. To Robinson and the it now seems obvious that Lucius had been Robinson's burglars. Lucius was subsequently arrested, though the outcome of the case would defy the expectation of all, or at least most involved. This guy's story gets really interesting. This is one interesting story. Hold on. One interesting story. Then it says at the preliminary examination on July the 1st, Lucius rather surprisingly chose to act as his own attorney. When the prosecution presented case, Lucius took extensive shorthand notes. He then proceeded with cross-examination that was so skillful and impressive that the detectives, the district attorney, and even the judge were all left shocked, and the case against Lucius began to look extremely weak. Newspaper called him one of the brightest and most remarkable prisoners they ever seen in years. And after the hearing, the judge remarked that few lawyers practicing in his court had ever conducted as skillful a line of cross-examination as this defendant. Then, when presenting his defense, Lucius explained that not only did he have a white British grandfather, but he had been educated for diplomatic service in London at according to his later claims, Oxford University, and could speak 13 languages. He added that after being released from prison in 1897, he had gone to Cuba before returning to Los Angeles to marry Maddie. Oh, so basically, Lucius Lehman would use what we call today NLP. For those of you that don't know NLP, right, I'm just going to give you a little something about it. NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. So that means being able to develop the skill setting to know how to use a form of manipulation and know how to use a gift of gab or finessing. Okay. So NLP would, if NLP is considered as pseudoscience. Okay. And the reason why it's considered pseudoscience is because it's inconclusive. It's not enough evidence to verify it. That's the only reason why it's considered pseudoscience. But if you was to put NLP in a category, it would go under cognitive psychology. It would go under cognitive science, because you deal with cognitive skills. You deal with the art of speaking, the art of thinking, the art of writing, and how to be able to convince people, and how to be able to bring about program the mindset of individuals, etc. That's where it'll fall under cognitive skills. Okay. Because that's what you're dealing with. So NLP can also be looked at as dark psychology, which is basically dark psychology. So in a sense, he was able to use a form of dark psychology to get over the law enforcement, to get over the courts, the judges, and all of that. So he was able to use a great speaking pattern. So anybody that knows how to get away, they can be able to learn how to finesse, use a gift of gab, and they can learn how to use technical vocabulary words that sound so impressive. that sound so, they can sound like they are highly educated and they can get around it. But if you listen to them closely, right, if you somebody that have good cognitive skills, you could be able to point out the lie. You could be able to point out when that person is being mischievous or being manipulative. But somebody who may not have strong cognitive skills as they think, and they get caught up with the word rhetoric of the individual, they may not be able to point out the fact that the person is lying or being manipulative or doing anything in that nature. They're just caught up with their communication skills, their the fact that they are elocutionists and they have strong speaking skills. So, and that's how sometimes people can get over it. It's a very tricky thing. Let me just tell you that. So for those of you that don't know what NLP is, I gave you a little glimpse of it. You can look up information about it. There's books on it. It's not that hard to find. You can find books on NLP. All right. So it's called neuro-linguistic programming. So according to this part of the passage that I just read, let me post that passage back up. All right. So I got it highlighted right here. So according to this passage right here, that's what he was able to do. He was able to finesse and use a gift of gab and be able to use his cognitive skills in the courtroom. So he was able to use that NLP. All right. But let's continue. Go down. It says, despite being impressed with Lucius, the judge was not ready to dismiss the case and a trial date was set. In the intervening time, the police discovered that Lucius' marriage to Anne had not been legally annulled. So Lucius was charged with bigamy. For this case, Lucius, who was seen reading a number of law books in the courtroom, hired a lawyer and explained that he had believed that he had indeed legally divorced Anne, and after examining the relevant documents, the court found out that this was the truth. At Lucius' burglary trial in October, for which he used a lawyer, his surprising conduct was again noted in the papers, though this time was an emphasis on his extremely relaxed attitude throughout the proceedings. Even when being questioned by the prosecutor, Lucius never once appeared flustered or unsure and continued to record every word that was said during the trial. His confidence was so unwavering that a rumor had spread that when he was leaving the city jail for court, the morning of his final trial day, he smiling told the guard open his cell door, "You will do that for me just once more." When, as he predicted, the case was dismissed, the Los Angeles Times called Lucius the color genius. What? And that he was a genius. All right. So I'm just gonna read this. This little last part right here, then I'm gonna skip down. Okay. After the trial, Lucius announced to the reporter that he was planning to return to Cuba, where he supposedly had served in the military under a General Garcia. Though by the next year he was back in Los Angeles, where his wife was giving birth to his child and where he filed under the Lucius cartel leaning as a British subject from West Indies. A new declaration of intention for naturalization and was officially made a citizen in 1903. Over the next 11 years, Lucius remained in the Los Angeles area, working primarily as a brick and tile maker until 1910. He, for the most part, avoided encounters with the law. All right. All right. So, also it says Lucius, however, was not one to remain out of the spotlight for long. In 1901, he conducted an interview with the Los Angeles Herald in which he claimed to be a grandson of Napoleon. Lucius told the reporter that his father was the second son of Napoleon and married Lucius' mother a native African woman. This son, he claimed, traveled extensively in Africa, going to Cape Town, South Africa, to Egypt, and later the Sudan, where Lucius Lehman was born, along with 11 other children of the Union. At the age of 13, Lucius claimed he was sent to Oxford and graduated from there in 1887, after which he spent 2 years in Heidelberg, Germany, studying civil engineering and language. The reporter noted that Lucius' comprehensive knowledge of history and world politics are convincing, if not conclusive, proofs of the genuineness of his claims. In addition to this being the first known instance in which Lucius claimed to be Sudanese, it was also the first in which he claimed to be a follower of Islam, which he said was the religion of his mother. None of this, of course, has ever been confirmed. So as you see, this man not only went through different identity crises, he done told multiple stories as far as like where his birthplace was, where he went to school and received education. And he was able to get away with that. Okay. So at that time period, see, we're talking in the 1900s and late 1800s, right? They didn't do all the extensive background check like they do today. Now, in today's time, it would be kind of hard for him to get away with all of that because of the upgrading of technology, right? You know what I'm saying? So with upgrading technology and DNA, it would be hard for him to get away with it. But at that time period, he was able to get away with a lot of stuff, you know, because they didn't do extensive background checks and they didn't have DNA records like they do now. Let's see. So basically, this man was a prisoner, was in and out of jail, or whatnot. Now let's go down to the concept of the rise of Islamic black nationalism. Okay. So it says in the year 1920 marks the birth of modern African American Islam. During the era of slavery, Muslim accounted for at most only 20% of all enslaved Africans in the U.S., having been separated by slave owners from their co-religiousness of the same language in order to inhibit communication, which would ultimately reduce their ability to form successful rebellions. There were only a handful of places in the country where Islam was kept alive at all, and it was rarely adhered to by the American born. By 1900, there were also no traces of Islam left in the African American community. Oh, it says during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, only a few Black Americans were known to be Muslim, the majority of which were poor African immigrants who had come to the U.S. since the 1800s to perform in various Oriental shows across the country. In addition, we know of at least 3 Black individuals who were probably promoting Islam to African Americans: the Sudanese Sati Majid, the self-proclaimed Sudanese Egyptian Abdul Hamid Suleiman, and the North Carolina-born noble Jew Ali, who most likely had been a student of Suleiman. Though we lack non-oral tradition evidence for their pre-1920 Islamic activity with African Americans, and given the lack of historical record, it is probable that their leadership produced few followers at the time. So it goes on to say the first group to successfully spread Islam among African Americans was the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam, a South Asian Islamic sect that had sent a missionary, Muhammad Sadiq, to the U.S. in the early 1920s after experiencing racism himself and failing to find many white converts. Sadiq turned his attention towards African American, particularly in Chicago, Detroit, Indiana, St. Louis, and converted around 700 before his departure in the fall of 1923. The year Suleiman made headlines, leading a similar group in Newark. Sadiq's successor, Muhammad, then converted several hundred more by 1925 when he set sail for India. Then success did not arrive until 1928. And during the intervening years, Sati Majid was able to make a number of African American Sunni converts, and Noble Drew Ali organized a new African American Islamic movement known as the Moorish Science Temple in Chicago, which quickly gained several thousand members in the North, Midwest, and Mid Atlantic cities. The death of Noble Drew Ali in the summer of 1929 left a major leadership vacuum in the African American Islamic community, which appears to have largely been filled by Was D. Farr, who founded the Nation of Islam in Detroit, a formerly Ahmadiyya and MSD stronghold in 1930, and soon spread his teaching to Chicago and Milwaukee, ultimately gaining up to 8,000 members by November of 1932. And it says, although none of these movements share the same Islamic doctrine, what appears to have united all of them and contribute to their success is an interest in and respect for the Black nationalism of Marcus Garvey and his United Negro Improvement Association. The Ahmadis found allies in a number of converts from among the UNIA members. Though Drew Ali referred to Garvey as his forerunner, several of the Sati Majid followers had been committed to Garvey's ideal, and not only did the NOI probably recruit followers from the UNIA, its well-known leader Elijah Muhammad praised for Garvey. This fundamental connection to Garvey reflects the important role he served in reshaping African American culture at the time. All right, so it goes on to state that a highly charismatic speaker and effective organizer, Garvey, who after establishing his UNIA in New York City in 1916, by 1920 had made the UNIA the largest and perhaps the most influential mass movement in the history of African Americans. His rapid and impressive success was primarily due to his ability to, as E. David Cronin expressed it, put into powerful ringing phrases the secret thoughts of the Negro world. And it says, particularly the idea that Black skin was not a badge of shame, but a glorious symbol of national greatness. African Americans, in other words, were part of the large Black nation that deserved its own land, just like any other nation in America. Furthermore, whites would never allow Blacks to have equally. Therefore, he argued African Americans should move back to Africa and establish economic and social independence from whites. It was an inspiring and attractive message for African Americans who will only now begin to immigrate out of the Jim Crow South. It was, in fact, an attractive message to Black people throughout the world, indeed, worldwide. So it says the UNIA gained probably over 80,000 official members and 100,000 non-registered believers. And its newspaper, the Negro World, had a circulation of at least 50,000. Garvey's power to connect the world, Black people, and give them a sense of dignity and common cause led to a significant transformation of African American culture and the development of many new Black identities that reflected the UNIA nationalist message. All right. So it also said the interest in Islam among African Americans in the 1920s and early 1930s were highly influenced by the UNIA endorsement of the religion. Garvey, who had read the pro-Islam Black nationalist writings of Edward Blyden and had worked for in 1913 a British Muslim Black nationalist named Dulce Muhammad Ali, sometimes mentioned Islam and its prophet in his speeches. Also, the Negro World ran a number of stories about Muslims in the 1920s, particularly 1922, the year Dulce served as newspaper foreign affairs column writer and head of the UNIA's African Affairs Department. Islam, in fact, featured prominently in the Negro World in the first half of the 1920s. The Negro World therefore played an important role in spreading the connection between Islam and Black nationalism that would serve as a foundation for the several African American Islamic groups at the time. What is notable about the references to Islam in the Negro world, however, is that only a very small number actually endorsed the uniting of Islam to Black nationalism. For the most part, Islam was simply regarded as the religion of many Africans and other non-white people who were struggling against European colonialism, and therefore it was to be respected in the spirit of Black and anti-colonial unity. Nevertheless, there were still some instances in which Islam and Black nationalism were clearly connected. One of the earliest example of this appeared in the March 25th, 1922 issue, which happened to also be dated of the appearance of the first Foreign Affairs column, and therefore around the beginning of the UNIA's 1920s interest in Islam. This connection was made on page 8 in a letter to the UNIA member sent by the Mullah of St. Quentin. And who was the Mullah of St. Quentin? None other than Lucius Lehman. All right. Now, let's go down to where it says Islam and Black nationalism in St. Quentin prison in 1920s. In the late 19th century and the first decade of the 20th, life for a Black American in California was significantly better than it was in the South, or even in most places in the North. African Americans were sometimes permitted to buy properties in white areas. There was a small but growing Black businesses and professional class. And though white racism, of course, existed, racist violence was minimal and interracial interaction were not infrequent. One major reason for this tolerance was that California's Black population was relatively small, especially compared to the Mexican and Chinese population. And therefore, whites did not feel particularly threatened. Keyword threatened. See, if you had more Black population in the white area, white folks would have felt threatened by being around a bunch of Black folks. But because it was a less Black population and it was more like Mexican and Chinese people, they didn't feel as threatened. Let's go ahead and continue. All right. For instance, in Los Angeles, Lucious home, the total Black population in 1890 was only 1,285 compared to 47,205 whites, making African Americans 2.5% of the population. In 1900, the proportion dipped to 2%, and in 1910, the percentage of Blacks only increased to 2.3% with 7,599 individuals. All right. So it says, however, during the first decade of Lucius incarceration in St. Quentin, California's African American population roughly doubled as hundreds of thousands of America's Blacks fled the South at the beginning of the Great Migration. With this growing Black presence and the concomitant rise in racial tension throughout the country, California's white racism, both formal and informal, began increasing proportionally. African Americans in California now more segregated and subject to violence than ever before. It did not take long then for the community more race-minded leaders to begin showing interest in Garvey's message. By 1920, the Negro word was circulated throughout the state, and UNIA division were being established in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Oakland. With Garvey's message spreading fast, particularly in the Bay Area, it is not surprising that the Negro world had made it behind the walls of one of the Bay Area's most notorious prisons by early 1922. So at the time, St. Quentin did not have a particularly large Black population. In 1922, African Americans number only 158 compared to 2,148 whites, a number that surely included several hundred Latinos. Indeed, when a race riot broke out in 1925, it was between whites and Latinos. African Americans are not recorded to have been involved. This, however, did not mean that St. Quentin's Black were fully integrated, though they were tolerate, and even gain some status as prison characters, which involve playing to racial stereotypes. They seem to have been avoided by whites and excluded from the more enjoyable jobs supplementary activities such as the publishing of the prison short-lived newspaper. For the most part, the black inmates went largely ignored. Meanwhile, St. Quentin from the periods have little to say about Africans there. And it seemed that the group formed a quiet and probably relatively tight-knit community. If a member of such a community was as confident, intelligent, and frankly manipulative as Lucius seemed to have been, it is easy to see how this person could have exerted influence on St. Quinn's African Americans, particularly during a time when black nationalism was gaining a large number of converts. And it says what led Lucius to begin proclaiming himself to be a mullah and later imam around 1917 is still unknown, but doing so was perfectly consistent with his many claims of high birth and education, as well as his attempts to use these claims to his average in difficult situation. The fact that in any one year in 1910s and 1920s, there were only around a half a dozen or so Muslims in St. Quentin suggests that if Lucius was using the titles mullah and imam as a way of gaining respect from or perhaps control over these individuals, there is little chance one of them could have known if Lucius was faking his religious knowledge. Lucius may have indeed been raised as a Muslim, but there is, outside of his own assertion, almost no evidence to support his claim of religious training or even adherence prior to coming to St. Quentin. He furthermore was a quick study with a nimble mind, so faking it in a very convincing way does not seem to be beyond Lucius' abilities or tendency. In the end, though, whatever his reasons for using the title, Lucius continued to do so for the rest of his time in St. Quentin. All right. Um, By the early 1922, Lucius added a new element to his identity, that of a black nationalist. After reading in the Negro World a letter promoting the role of women in the black nationalist movement, Lucius penned on February 27th a reply that will appear in papers late March issue. In his letter, which was signed Lucius C. Lehman, Luco Laneri Mullah, Imam of Islam, Egyptian student, Lucius commends the earlier letters writing saying that black women should play an important role in motivating the army of Negro jellyfishes too ignorant to know the difference between a fact and a theory to work for the cause of black nationalism. Lucius praises Garvey for being fearless and true. And like Garvey, he feels that because of his racism, Lucifer's prize winning design, African Americans have no chance at equality and happiness in the United States. They should return to Africa where they can use the knowledge they have gained from the West, bring all Negroes near their ancient glory. The UNIA is in fact a lost answer to Ethiopia's centuries of truthful prayers. Mm. Mm-mm-mm. So he goes on. He goes on to say it was an eloquent and powerful call to black nationalism that does not seem to have been entirely born out of opportunistic desire to influence in the small black community in St. Quentin. One of the piece evidence supporting this is the fact that in a letter Lucius wrote in 1924 to one of his supporters on the outside expressed pride in never having to be an Uncle Tom. It also must be remembered that throughout Lucius known life in Los Angeles, at least in the way he presented it, he was constant victim of undeserved white racism. The courts, all the judges, lawyers, and jury members he faced were all white. Even the supposed assault and robbery he suffered in 1905, though it was a at the hands of African Americans was indirectly the result of white racism. After going from restaurant to restaurant looking for a place that would allow blacks to eat inside, he was finally only allowed into a black establishment, which happened to be the place his assailant found him. Even if Lucius was a fraud, complete fraud, he undoubtedly was aware of and most likely resentful towards the fact that a man of his intelligence and ability was prohibited from achieving professional success and relegated to manual labor and perhaps swindling primarily due to the color of his skin. All right. Give me 1 second. Give me a moment. Okay, so I'm back. All right, so it also goes down and says, seems very likely that Lucius, who had another impressive letter published in the Negro World in September, did achieve some influence in St. Quentin's black community, especially considering the fact that he was one of the only two self-proclaimed Africans in prison at the time, which would have made Lucius the object of respect among Garvey-leaning men. While we do not currently have information about the impact of Garvey on other St. Quentin inmates in 1922, there is evidence at least as early as 1924, Garveyism was on the rise in the prison. So a January 1925 letter to the Negro World from a St. Quentin inmate indicates as much and explained the black nationalist spirit had become so strong that on New Year's Day, 1925, the majority of black inmates stood together to protest a recent racially motivated incident in which only their proportion of the dining hall was used for the holiday's annual vaudeville performance, and to demonstrate to the prison authorities that they were very tired of forever being the GOAT every time in everything. All right, it said, despite being taunted and threatened by white inmates, the groups in a very self-controlled manner resisted fighting and instead sent a spokesperson to the guards to explain that they would not be attending the performance. The guards accepted their position and the group remained in the prison yard debating race condition and their remedies. By the end of the ordeal, letter writer claimed St. Quentin's black population was 100% Garveyized. Lucius was patrolled on good behavior in July of 1924 and never again appears in the Negro World or known documents connected to California's UNIA. So it is uncertain as to exactly the full extent of the role he may have played in the spread of Garveyism. But the fact that the New Year's Day incidents occur only 5 months after his release increases the chances that the memory and inspiration of Lucius was still fresh in the prisoner's mind. So let's go down. Let's continue. It says, increasingly, St. Quentin was not the sole penitentiary converted to Garveyism during that period. From 1924 to 1926, black prisoners across the country were reportedly joining, at least in spirit, the ranks of UNIA, believing that Garvey had the plan that would free the entire Negro race. At the same time, there also seemed to have been a short-lived burst of interest in Muslim and Islam in the UNIA. And if we are to judge by the division reports published in the Negro World, the Oakland UNIA, the most influential UNIA division in California at the time, and therefore the one most likely to have influenced the prisoners in nearby St. Quentin was outside of New York. The UNIA division with perhaps the strongest interest in Muslims. And it says, there is therefore strong circumstantial evidence that not just Garveyism but Islam teen black nationalism was circulating in the St. Quentin black prison population upon the arrival of the man going as Wallace D. Ford in 1926. Ford at the time was a well-known street politician and opium dealer in Los Angeles who, because of both his ambiguous racial identity and his Islamic background, may have found in St. Quentin's Islamic influence Garveyism a perfect niche to develop a new identity and career. As for Lucius, all that can be documented about his life after St. Quentin is that he returned to work as a brickmaker and retired by 1936. On February 11, 1937, he died from severe osteoporosis, or what's it, atherosclerosis or something like that. So I guess it's coming from his arteries. So he had severe artery issues. All right. And it says the call to Islam. So we currently know almost nothing about how Lucius put his Islamic identity to use during his years living in Los Angeles, and we know only a little about how he used it in St. Quentin. What we do know, however, is that nearly 2,000 miles west of the nearest African-American Islamic community of any significant size, the Ahmadi community in St. Louis in 1920s, a black man was presenting himself as a learned, identified Muslim in the early 19... Oh, how you say that? Is it, let me get this, rotosclerosis? Is it rotosclerosis? It's artis. Oh, arteriosclerosis. Arteriosclerosis. Okay, arteriosclerosis. I know it got something to do with arteries, so it's arteriosclerosis. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Damn. Where was I at? That's why I said it's arteriosclerosis, right? That's why I said arteriosclerosis. Yeah, arteriosclerosis. Yeah, I said arteriosclerosis. Yeah, arteriosclerosis. Okay. But y'all get the legits of it, right? Y'all get it. Y'all get the legits of it. Arteriosclerosis. Yeah. Severe arteriosclerosis. All right. I'll come back and correct that later. But thank you for that. Thanks for that. It's golf. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate it though. I appreciate it. I'll come back to it later. Anyways, let me get back to where was I reading? All right, so it says we currently know nothing about how Lucius put his Islamic identity during his years living in Los Angeles, and we know only a little about how he used it in St. Quentin. What we do know, however, is that nearly 2,000 miles west of nearest African American Islamic community of any significant size, the Ahmadi community in St. Louis in the 1920s, a black man was presenting himself as a learned and dignified Muslim in as early as 1901, and by 1920s, he was overly supporting black nationalism. He almost certainly did all of this without any knowledge of Islamic movements in the eastern United States. The story of Lucius' life didn't help us to see that Islam did not spread in African American culture simply through the efforts of the group of Islamic leaders in the eastern United States who were, and I'm gonna skip this word, but anyways, this term basically right here basically means those who was converting or getting people to give into a religious ideology. So I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that word, but anyways, so yeah, to African Americans and who almost certainly all knew about and perhaps coordinate or competed with each other. There seems to have been, at least for some who had experienced being Black in America in the early 20th century, an almost natural connection between Islam and Black nationalism. It is thus now easier to see not only how the early leaders of Black nationalist Islam were able to draw thousands, but also why, as time passed, second generation African American Muslim leaders like Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan were able to command the attention of tens and even hundreds of them. The story of Lucius' life, whether there is a connection to the NOI's Fard or not, it is therefore a testament to the power of Islam in African American culture. So, a 1924 letter, Lucius stated, "My story will be told someday. Sensation upon sensation will follow." Lucius' story, at least a significant part of it, has now been finally told. It remains to be seen, however, what sensation may follow. All right, so again, this comes from the Harvard University website, and this was written by Patrick D. Bowen. So Patrick D. Bowen was also the same person that that's the wrong thing. All right, so he also wrote this book right here, which is called A History of Conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 2, the African American Islamic Renaissance from 1920 to 1975. All right. So yeah, Islam has been long practiced for a long period of time in America, but it didn't gain its notoriety until around the 1920s. All right. But one of the first Muslims to practice Islam was the African slaves, but they could not freely practice out in the open. So, and they were also zikratizing as well. And then there was many of them that converted into Christianity later on. What an interesting story. So now, with this book right here, A History of Conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 2, which is written by the same person, Patrick D. Bowen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the information. And I had to do it like this because I did it this way because it's a lot easier. That way I won't have to go through the book and look all over the passages as far as like what passage I want to use or whatnot. So I figure it would just be a lot easier. So in his book, all right, and also I'm gonna show y'all another trick. See, I converted over here to the little file so that way y'all can follow along. So yeah. All right. So yeah, I did it like this. So of course the information cited, the sources cited, the name of the book is at the top, as you can see, and the pages are cited at the bottom. All right. But let me go over here and let me read it for you guys. So Lucius Lehman, all right, according to Patrick D. Bowen in his book called A History of Conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 2, these passages states, Lucius Lehman had first made a name for himself in Los Angeles in 1890 when he successfully served as his own attorney at a trial for a burglary charge. All right, so Lehman displayed an exceptional mind and claimed at various times to have been born to African parents. At one point, he insists he was the Sultan of a Sudanese woman and a son of Napoleon, and educated in Europe for a diplomatic service. So in 1906, after he had begun telling people he was a Muslim who could speak at least dozens languages, Lehman became involved in the birth of the Pentecostal movement when he was invited to the Pentecostals' famous first church on Azusa Street to translate the messages that were being spoken in tongues. There, Lehman said he heard a language that only he could understand, and that the message converted him to Christianity. However, it took just a month for him to leave the group, and by 1910s, while he was serving a sentence in St. Quentin prison after being convicted of a murder charge, he was once again identified as a Muslim and even claimed to be a Muslim priest, although we do not know if he was converting anyone at this time. His activity during the Air, as we will later see, have ensured his place in the history of African American Islam. All right, so that's page 71 of his book. And this is the first passage that speaks on Lucius Lehman as a prisoner at St. Quentin Penitentiary. Then the second passage states, the first wave of Islamic currents hit the African American community started in January 1922. So when Garvey gave a speech in which he compared the UNIA's leader to the founder of Christianity and Islam, Jesus and Muhammad, Garvey's point was that both figures should be models for the UNIA heads and even ranks and files member, as they had strong faith and despised making incredible sacrifices and experiencing many vicissitudes that they endured until their time of triumph. Muhammad, particularly important model, not only because of Islam's success in spreading across a large region, but perhaps more importantly, because he had led his followers towards the great light of liberty. Then on March 25th, two significant items appear in that week's Negro World. The first was the premiere of Duce Foreign Affairs column, right, which I read before in the previous article, which was dedicated to the news about anti-colonial movements taking place around the world. Okay. For the 6 months that Duce wrote this weekly, he nobly only explicitly identified Muslims on occasion. However, during this period, likely due to Duce's influence, the Negro World saw a rise in the number of other news articles discussing colonial or resistant activities in Muslim majority lands, particularly Turkey and Egypt, a trend that was continued through the next year. The Negro World also began sporadically printing photographs of Muslims from around the world. Of course, not every reader was fond of Duce's pro-Muslim influence. Islam received some criticism in the Negro World during this period, and the Bureau of Investigation, the predecessor to the FBI, found Duce present in the UNIA somewhat troublesome because of his affiliation with various international anti-colonial movements. And nevertheless, it was due largely to Duce that information about Islam and Muslim was for the first time in history being regularly disseminated to a large number of African Americans. The other important piece in the March 25th issue was a letter written by Lucius Lehman, a self-proclaimed mullah, imam of Islam, Egyptian Sudan, right, who revealed that he was also went by the name Lucius Lehman, informed the UNIA of his belief that the organization was a lost answer to colonialism in Africa. And it said at the time of his writing, this letter, though Lucius was living several thousand miles away from Africa in California, St. Quentin prison, indeed, this was the same Lucius who, as we saw after one, was serving a life sentence for first-degree murder, who only started claiming to be a Muslim authority in the 1910s. The significance of Lucius pro-Garvey Muslim presence in St. Quentin will be taken up again below. But his 1922 letter is significant in its own right. It first off appears to be the first of only a few examples in the Negro world of someone clearly combining a commitment to Islam with a commitment to the UNIA. Not even Duce had yet explicitly mentioned in the Negro world his identity as a Muslim, even if his name implied it. Furthermore, by Lucius claiming to be from Sudan, his letter represented the connection between not just the UNIA and foreign Muslims in general, but one between Garveyism and a black Islamic identity specifically, a point that would have stood out to black nationalist-minded readers. The letters is also insignificant because it was published shortly before a similar connection was made by the UNIA's rival, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So, you know, that the UNIA and the NAACP, they was at odds with each other, right? Because W.E. Du Bois did not like Garvey, and Garvey did not like W.E.B. Du Bois, okay? Garvey thought W.E.B. Du Bois was a house Negro, and W.E.B. Du Bois thought he was just a finesser, thought Garvey was just fussing the people, and he didn't have no real intention. So there was some like conflict, some beef amongst them. It was like, we don't fuck with them people over there because niggas over there, they some bougie ass motherfucking, they over there fucking with them white folks. So, and these people over here, like, we don't deal with those guys over there because they too radical and they're gonna get somebody messed up and they're gonna get somebody hurt. And the leader of that movement, he doesn't care about the black people's interests. So it was a major conflict. All right. But let's continue. In April 1922, the NAACP announced that it had received its own letter from a Sudanese Egyptian who praised the organization's work and desired to become a member. While there is not enough evidence to determine whether the author of the NAACP missive was Lucius, it is interesting that, like a number of Muslim figures who had appeared in the post-World War I African American community, both of the correspondents authors claimed a Sudanese Egyptian background. Together, then, these letters and their being publicized represent a sense of alignment between Black Muslims and African Americans empowerment organization in 1922. Perhaps not coincidentally, just 2 weeks after Lucius' missive was printed, another self-proclaimed Sudanese Egyptian Muslim will appear in the pages of the Negro World. This time, the man's name was Dr. Abdul Hamid. He claimed to be from Khartoum in the Sudan and a 96-degree Mason and a Shriner. Acclaimed by his private secretary, one Clarence Kane, Hamid was the guest of honor at a gathering of prominent Black Freemasons on April 7th. This meeting had made it into the Negro World because a number of influential Garveyites were in attendance and were in fact among the most prominent people at the dinner. John E. Bruce, Ducey Muhammad Ali, Arthur A. Schomburg, a friend of Bruce and Ducey. Because of the significance of this meeting, it will be necessary to pause for a moment to go into more detail about these particular Garveyites and the specific connection between them, Freemasonry, the UNIA, and Islam. So this can be found on page 113 to 114, okay? And again, it comes from this book, The History of Conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 2, all right? All right, so as you can see, the concept of Black nationalism, right? And I'm going to go to the last part right here, but I'm going to stop right here. And let's talk about the part where it says Garveyites, connection between Freemasonry, UNIA, and Islam. So Garvey had a strong diversity, right? He had strong diversity amongst the Africans descendant of the world. So not everybody was a Christian, okay? Like Garvey was. He had people that was Muslim, he had people that was Masons, he had people that were neither one. All right. He had a strong influence over a lot of people, especially in the Black community. So Black Christian, Black Muslims, and Black non-religious people alike gravitated towards Garvey. Okay. So somebody asked me a question. Which of these two do you lean towards? That's a good question. So I'm glad that you asked the question, Isgoff. Who do I lean towards? I would lean towards more of Garvey because I understood Garvey better and what his position was. Garvey had a better position as far as what he was trying to get at. What he was trying to do is bring some type of connection of Black nationalism on not just from a national standpoint, but an international standpoint as well. So he wanted to be able to bring Black people in connection. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois at that time, I wouldn't lean towards him because he had a mindset of the fact that he was dealing with the NAACP, right? Which he was one of the founders of, but
later on in life, he started to like grow into Pan-African ideology, and he started changing his mind frame afterwards. So he started having a different outlook on things and started to get a better understanding of, black people and their condition. And the reason why I say Garvey, because Garvey understood. Garvey get it. You know what I'm saying? Garvey was, Garvey understood a lot of things. So Garvey understood the struggle of African Americans, and what influenced Garvey the most was Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington was a slave. He was born into slavery, but he became an entrepreneur later on in life. You know what I'm saying? He started what we know today as Tuskegee Institute. He was about do for self, do for your own, build up your own economics, etc. And that's what influenced Garvey. So Garvey wanted to meet this man. And that's one of the reasons why Garvey started the movement, the UNIA movement. So Garvey had the right idea. Now he was on the right track, but there was some misinformation that Garvey had too, and I can admit that myself. You know what I'm saying? He had a lot of misinformation, and he may have done things that was very mischievous, but the principle that he stood on, I respected a lot. You know what I'm saying? I understood it. So, and then, like I said, with W. Du Bois, he didn't grow up in a very, he didn't have to grow up in a racialized society per se, because he was born into a middle-class family. He didn't experience as much racism growing up until he came to the South, particularly in Atlanta. So a lot of people don't know that W.B. Du Bois was a professor at Atlanta University. Before there was a Clark Atlanta, he was a professor at Atlanta University. He was teaching sociology. He was teaching various subjects. He was a polymath. So, and Du Bois started to understand, but also at the same time, he had a very condescending mindset at one point in time. So, but as he studied and as he learned more, he started to like, you know what I'm saying? He started to embrace his African heritage. He started to understand what the importance of being black means, and he just started to grow into himself. So I would say that I like that Du Bois later on in life, the Du Bois that he became later on in life, not the bougie Du Bois that he was in the beginning. Yeah, that bougie guy that came from Harvard University, that came from Boston, Massachusetts, and that thought that he was better than everybody. But the Du Bois that he became later on in life, that's the one that I would respect the most. You know what I'm saying? Because he started to study more, and he started to have a different mind frame, and he became better. You know what I'm saying? But Garvey, yeah, he was on something totally different. I mean, that man was just on this whole idea of organizing, doing for self, and being able to build a national and global unity amongst black people. So, yeah, that's where I stand. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I like both of them. You know, I love both of them. Don't get me wrong, I love both of them, but Garvey is one of my favorites. You know. It says maybe not information, but occurrence relevant to a particular time may mean different things. I mean, yeah, at that time period, because I get what you're saying. They did not have enough information at that time, like we do today. There should be no excuse that we still gravitate towards a lot of pseudo ideologies, if you want to put it, okay? Because we got dictionaries. We got encyclopedias, right? You can go on websites, all right? You can go to the libraries, all right? You can go down, you can download PDFs. You can look up videos on YouTube. You can go on Khan Academy, which is an online course, and Coursera, etc. So it's really no excuse per se. You know what I'm saying? There's assets, but during the time of Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois period, there was limited access to information. Black people did not get into a lot of the STEM field at that time because black folks couldn't really get into a lot of STEM. They couldn't get into doing archaeology like that. So they depended on a lot of information that was coming from their white counterparts because they didn't have that type of access. You know what I'm saying? So they only had limited access to information. So what I'm saying is with Garvey at that time, he only had limited access to information to what he know. And also he was a Christian man, so he leaned towards the Bible a lot. But now that we in this era, we can go back and correct that mistake and information that Garvey has made. You know what I'm saying? We can say, okay, Garvey was right about this. He had a point on this, but he was wrong about this. Same way with W.E.B. Du Bois. W.E.B. Du Bois was right about a lot of things, but he was wrong about certain things as well. So, it's just about learning from what those ancestors has done and just take some of the information and correct those information. It's not to discredit them at all or to throw either one of them under the bus, but we just got to admit that there were certain things they had wrong. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, there were certain things they had wrong because, you know, it was only limited information. Let's see. Well, STEM really didn't come about until maybe the 1950s, but really the 1960s because it grew in the U.S. Cold War competition with USSR. Well, I mean, when I say STEM, I mean, of course, the acronym didn't come about, but when we talk about STEM, we're talking about, when I say STEM, when I'm talking about though, the science field, just dealing with the science and the engineering, mathematics fields, saying technology field. I mean, I'm not just talking about the acronym, you know what I mean, or the institutionalized version as we know of, but I'm saying, just what I'm speaking of is that you didn't have that many black people that was involved in science like that, or that was able to get into scientific fields of studies. And to this day, you still have an underrepresentation of black folks in the STEM the scientific field of study, especially those in anthropology. Okay, that's why people don't know a lot about cultural anthropology or cultural astronomy, because the underrepresentation is taking place. All right, so yeah, the institutionalized version of STEM didn't come to later on. But when I say STEM, I'm talking about just that particular those little subject fields, not the institutionalized version. But many of our people were polymaths, but they just could not get into those fields of study. You know what I'm saying? They didn't get, and then when they did get in those fields of study, they did not receive a lot of representation. I hope I'm making sense. I know I'm kind of like all over the place, but I'm hoping you getting where I'm coming from. Ooh, what did I do? I think I dropped. Oh, here's my bottle of water right here. I'm like, what did I do with my water? So, to get off what you were saying, my dear friend on here, to get back what you're saying, it was just limited information that was available to our people at that time. So our people did what they could, and they gathered what they was able to gather and be able to present whatever they could present to the people. You know what I'm saying? So in our generation, it's up to us to make those corrections and to be able, just by being able to be more studious and be able to do more research, or be able to write more articles and be able to share it with people. That's all. Go ahead. I am concerned more that there is a lack of African American notable scholars, whereas the post-colonial African has many notable thinkers making an impact on a world scale. I mean, here's the thing. There is plenty of African Americans notable scholars out there. All right. There's plenty of them, but they just don't receive the recognition. That's just all it is. It's just, you have to do what people got to understand. You got to do plethora of research. You know what I'm saying? And by you mentioning African scholars, not many people know about African scholars like that either. You know what I'm saying? Even in the post-colonial era, you don't know that many African scholars. You only know a few amount of African scholars, just like a few amount of African American scholars. But you just have to go online. You're gonna have to find the books or the ebooks or PDFs and just look them up. That's what people have to do, because you're not gonna learn. I'm gonna be real with you. I've been to college before, okay? You're not gonna learn a lot of this stuff in secondary school. You're not gonna learn a lot of it in college. They gonna give you a little bit, just enough for you to get by. But the rest you gotta do on your own. You know what I'm saying? Because secondary school, you already don't learn this stuff in elementary school and high school, and so you're not gonna learn a lot of this stuff because you're getting it from someone else's narrative. So when you go to college, you're only gonna be exposed to a little bit of information, just a little bit, just part about this much. You're gonna be exposed to when you go to college, and everything else you gotta branch off on your own. Now, unless you come across a professor, depends on who your professor is. Whoever your professor is, and they care enough about you and your education, right? They may give you more sources to look up. They may give you more information that you got to look into. But again, you'll have to do a lot of that on your own. And it has to take us to actually go and do those research. We have to take that initiative. We have to go and look it up. So for me, I had to take the initiative and find out a lot of things that I did not know. You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to make this so much about me, but kind of getting off subject, I just want to say this. I had to learn on my own, pretty much. A lot of the stuff that you see that I'm posting up, a lot of the videos that I do, I had to go and look that stuff up on my own. Now, I was able to learn from my peers, and I'm not talking about peers as far as those at colleges and university. I'm talking about peers those that I met from interacting in the community. You know what I'm saying? Interacting online with. You know what I'm saying? I learned a lot of this stuff on social media. That's a great thing about social media, because you'll come across people who are already on that level or a little bit above your level, right? I had to go to the library, look up stuff on my own. You know what I'm saying? I had to interact with people on the streets. You know what I'm saying? Like in the hood, on the street corner, in the hood, just having these type of conversation. These are like regular conversation that we have. Now, to an average person, it's not a regular conversation, it's something new. But to me, this is something regular, because I've been doing it for years. You know what I mean? So I mean, you just have to be the one to want to have the passion, and you have to have that drive to learn. And if you somebody that works in the field of education, and you really want to be able to be passionate enough to study these things and expose it to your students, you know what I mean? So like, if you have a classroom that's majority African Americans, especially, you want to be able to show it to them and say, hey, this is what our people done, this is the information. And so if you don't think that you don't have a history, you do. Your ancestors made it possible for you. So it's all about being able to take the initiative. You got to be the polymath. You got to be the autodidact. You got to be all of that. You have to be the one to do it for yourself, because you're not going to get everything from an institution, and you're not going to learn everything. You're not going to learn everything from the public school system. Let's face the reality. You're not going to learn from university. A lot of stuff you got to learn on your own. And that's what life is about. Life is like, it's about education. It's about being able to learn and being able to live. If you don't learn, then how you going to be able to live? How you going to be able to understand? Yeah. But, by us living in America, they're only going to give you so much info as far as who is notable scholars and who have made a worldly impact. They're only going to give you so much information. We live in America. We live in a post-racial society, okay? We still deal with racism, whether people want to hear it or not. So we only going to get limited source of information on certain people. And when you do get certain Black folks, right, All right. They only pick and choose of as far as like what narrative they want to talk about as far as the individual and not talk about the whole narrative. So I want to say this real quick and then I'm gonna get back to the article. For example, Dr. Martin Luther King. They talk a lot about Dr. King, right? And the main thing that they talk about as far as Dr. King is concerned is what? The I have a dream speech. That's the main thing they'll talk about is I have a dream. That's the narrative they want to give us. But what they don't tell you is Dr. King that did other speeches, right? Besides that, I mean, he did speech that was very deep. The one that was my favorite is the Two Americas. The Two Americas speech. That's my favorite one. And if you listen to the I Have a Dream speech, if you closely listen to it, he talks about police brutality. That's what he's really speaking on, police brutality. You got to listen to the whole speech. You can't just listen to that portion. But people get caught up on that portion that I have a dream that little black boys and girls and white boys and girls come together, etc., etc. But they're not listening to the entire thing. So yeah, you live in that society where you're only gonna get so much narrative. You're gonna get a little bit of narrative about a particular individual in your group, and you're gonna be stuck with that narrative. Because that's just how they do it. Yeah. So let me go ahead and go back to this article real fast, or go back to this source rather. All right. So again, let's go down to the last piece of this. So Lucius Lehman, a self-proclaimed Egyptian mullah, and he wrote one of the first documents explicitly connecting Lima to Islam, the UNIA to Islam, excuse me, in March of 1922, may have left his mark on the black inmates at St. Quentin Prison, where he was incarcerated to 1924. In January 1925, a St. Quentin inmate wrote to the Negro World claiming that by the first of the year, the black inmate population had become 100% Garveyized in spirit. In 165, it is likely that Lucius, whose Sudanese Egyptian Islamic identity and claim of Islamic authority, Imam and Mullah, would have been attractive to the UNIA influenced prisoners, and had made several Garveyite associates and perhaps a few converts to Islam. He had, after all, some experience as a minor religious authority during the Azura Street revival. It is also possible, though, that some of the imprisoned Garveyites were learning about Islam through other Islam influenced African Americans during the early era. It is noteworthy that the Islam influenced Garveyite poet Ethel True Dunlap was herself living in California at the time, and some of these prisoners like Dunlap may have been corresponding with the Ahmadis, who were still relatively popular with UNIA members. At the very least, it is probable that given the UNIA's Islamophilia in the 1920s, that and the fact that the closest UNIA division to St. Quentin, the Oakland division, was especially interested in promoting connection with North African Muslims in 1925. There was more than likely some Islamophilia circulating in St. Quentin's black population in the 1920s, and that's on page 153 to 154. And once again, it's coming from this book right here. All right, so I would suggest you guys get this book by Patrick D. Bowen on the history of conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 2. You will learn a lot. There's a lot of plethora of information. I mean, it's very detailed. I have actually got a chance to look through the book when I was trying to find passages on as far as like what information I wanted to use for this subject matter, but it's a lot of source in there. So I would suggest you guys get this book right here. Put that on your bucket list. Go to Amazon website. Whatever you gotta do, get the PDF. Whatever you gotta do, just get it. All right. All right. So that's enough for my literature review. and my subject for today. If anybody else got anything they want to say in the comment section before I leave. If not, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, like my channel, share my channel, all that great stuff. And for those of you who are the new subscribers on here, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys coming in and watching and supporting the channel and whatnot. The channel is growing each day, and I'm looking to do a lot more things. So there's a lot more stuff I gotta get into. It's a lot. It's a long list. It's a long list of stuff. All right. I'm looking to get more people on here so I can have like a interview or dialogues on here so I can have so I can discuss the subject matters, whatever subject that we want to talk about, or I might have like an open forum. I don't know yet. I'm just trying to map everything out. I'm gonna take my time with this, so I'm just going to like try to map everything out. But I do know that I want to get some more people on here to do like interviews with. But I want to get like more people that's into the scholarship, more like people that's in various fields of study, so that way, especially those who are African or African American descent or those in the diaspora, that way more and more people can be able to like gravitate to their information, read their books, read their articles, or whatever the case may be. And yeah, they can see the diversity. They can see that there's people in various subject fields, So that's something I'm working on doing one day, hopefully. Inshallah, as the Muslim would say, inshallah, if Allah wills it so. All right. If nature wills it so, in my case. But other than that, that's all I have for today. I don't have anything else to say. I just want to thank everybody for coming through. Thank you guys on the chat for tuning in. Let's see. DC Black Power Youngsters still going strong after all these years. Stay strong. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you for coming through, and shout out to you. I appreciate your support. Like real talk, I really appreciate it. You have always been there, so thank you. All right. Let's see. Mm-hmm. All right. I'm just trying to see if anybody else got anything else they want to say in the comment section before I close this out. No, nothing else. No, no comments. No. Okay. Well, I guess I'll digress in the video. So until next time, I'll talk to y'all later. Well, I will be on here tomorrow. Okay, so I'll be on here tomorrow, and I will have to find a subject that I want to talk about. Hey, it's golf. If you have a Facebook, go ahead and add me on Facebook if you have a Facebook page. Of not, or add me on Instagram. Okay, so if you can just give me your information, and I can reach out to you. I would like to have a conversation with you one day. So, if you're watching this, if not, then that's cool, understandable. Everybody don't do social media. Everybody don't do Facebook or Instagram or any other social media. Okay, so for my Facebook is Tiffany French. I'm gonna type it in. I'm gonna type it in for you. Hold on. All right, then. Yeah, just go ahead and add that, and then send me a friend request, and I will add you on. So, whoo. But anyways, you guys, I hope that you all have a good one. I hope y'all be safe, and thank you once again to the chat. Peace to the chat. I appreciate y'all coming through. I really do appreciate the support. Y'all could have been anywhere in the world. Y'all could have been somewhere sleeping. Y'all could have been somewhere chilling. You could have been somewhere drinking, smoking. I'm just saying, y'all could have been somewhere breaking your fast, or y'all could have been somewhere doing whatever, partying, whatever y'all do. You know what I'm saying? Or spend time with your kid. But you chose to watch me, and I'm more than appreciative of that. I really appreciate that a lot. I couldn't ask for nothing else. Thank y'all so much. That's all right with me. So it lets me know that your time is valuable. So I'm just going to go ahead and close it out, and that's it. Y'all be safe. Peace and power and elevation. Salam alaikum to all my Muslim brothers and sisters out there. Ramadan Mubarak. I hope y'all had a good fast, and I'll come back tomorrow. All right, with another subject. So I'm gonna tell you guys the subject on social media for those of you on my page, or I'll put it on my YouTube community session thing and let y'all know. All right, keep you updated. All right then, peace.